Julianne Grayson knew what people thought when they saw her life from the outside. They saw the beautiful craftsman home in the suburbs, with its carefully tended garden. They saw the handsome husband with his steady bank job, the bright 8-year-old son, and her own seemingly perfect existence as the woman who had it all figured out. What they didn't see were the fault lines forming beneath that polished surface, the hairline cracks that had been spreading for months before she finally found the courage to ask the question. "You've been quiet tonight," Daniel said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as he drove them home from the bank's annual holiday party. The dashboard lights cast shadows across his face, hollowing his cheekbones and hiding his eyes. "Did you have an awful time?" Julianne turned toward the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur past like dying stars. "No, it was fine." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Nothing had been fine about watching her husband laugh too eagerly at another woman's jokes, standing just a fraction too close to her. Nothing had been fine about the way Wendy Higgins had touched Daniel's arm, her manicured fingers lingering a beat too long against his suit jacket. "You barely spoke to anyone." His voice held an edge, the smallest hint of accusation. "I spoke to plenty of people." She kept her voice deliberately even. "Your boss seemed impressed with the new account acquisitions." Daniel nodded, apparently satisfied that the conversation had shifted to safer territory. "Thomas thinks we'll exceed our quarterly targets. He mentioned I'm being considered for the senior analyst position." 12 years ago, this news would have elicited genuine excitement from Julianne. They would have pulled into their garage, rushed inside, and opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. She would have watched Daniel's face light up as he described his plans, the futures they would build together. 12 years ago, before she set aside her architecture degree to raise their son, before the daily rhythms of their lives had worn smooth all their sharp edges, making them comfortable but somehow less vital to each other. "That's wonderful," she said, because that was what she was supposed to say. Because despite everything, she did want him to succeed. That much hadn't changed. Mason was asleep when they arrived home. The babysitter, Iris's neighbor's college daughter, curled up on their sofa with a textbook. Julianne paid her while Daniel headed upstairs to check on their son. "He was great," the babysitter said, stuffing the money into her pocket. "He showed me this amazing drawing he made today. It's on the fridge. The kid's got serious talent." After the front door closed behind the babysitter, Julianne walked to the refrigerator. Mason's drawing was held up by a magnet shaped like a pallet, a gift from her mother-in-law last Christmas. The picture showed 3 stick figures, one tall male figure standing apart from a woman and child who were holding hands. The space between the male figure and the others seemed deliberate, a visual representation of distance that made Julianne's chest tighten. She was still staring at the drawing when Daniel came back downstairs. "Sound asleep," he said, loosening his tie. "Didn't even stir when I kissed his forehead." Julianne nodded, her finger tracing the gap in Mason's drawing. "Have you noticed anything different about his pictures lately?" Daniel opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. "Different how?" "The way he draws us. You're always separated from Mason and me." Daniel glanced at the drawing, his expression unreadable. "It's just a kid's drawing, Jules. Don't read too much into it. Children express what they observe," she said quietly. "He's picking up on something." Daniel sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. "It's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Can we not do this tonight?" There it was, the familiar deflection, the careful sidestepping of any conversation that might force them to acknowledge what was happening. For months, Julianne had respected these boundaries, had allowed herself to be redirected and placated. But tonight, watching Wendy Higgins lean into her husband's space, seeing the spark in Daniel's eyes that had once been reserved for her alone, tonight, something had shifted. "When did you stop talking to me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "When did we become people who just coordinate schedules and discuss grocery lists?" Daniel's shoulders tensed. He set the water bottle down with deliberate care. "I talk to you every day." "No, You speak words in my direction. That's not the same thing. What do you want from me, Julianne? The rare use of her full name rather than Jules signaled his growing frustration. I work 50 hours a week. I coach Mason's soccer team. I fix things around the house. What else am I supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be present, she said, the words escaping before she could measure them. Not just physically here, but actually with us. With me. Daniel's expression hardened. I'm doing the best I can. Are you? The question hung between them, dangerous and electric, because it seems like you save your best for work, for your colleagues. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Julianne took a deep breath, the image of Wendy Higgins's hand on Daniel's arm flashing through her mind. You know exactly what it means. No, I don't. Daniel's voice had dropped, becoming quiet in the way that once meant he was truly angry. But it sounds like you've got something specific you want to say, so why don't you just say it? He hadn't planned this confrontation, hadn't rehearsed the words. But now that the moment was here, Julianne found herself oddly calm, as if she'd been preparing for this conversation her entire adult life. You've been working late 3 nights a week for the past 2 months, she said. Your phone is always face down now. You changed your password. You've started dressing differently. That new cologne wasn't a gift from me. And tonight, I watched you with her. The color drained from Daniel's face. With who? Wendy Higgins, your new investment manager. The one you've mentioned 17 times in the past month. Yes, I counted. The one who apparently needs to text you at 11:30 at night about urgent portfolio adjustments. She's a colleague, Daniel said, but his eyes slid away from hers. We're working on a major project together. I'm not a fool, Daniel. The calm was receding now, replaced by a rising tide of hurt. I've seen how you look at her. I saw how she touched you tonight. There's something happening between you two. Nothing is happening, he insisted, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. Then why does it feel like I'm losing you? Julianne hated the vulnerability in her question, hated that after 12 years of marriage, she still needed reassurance that she was enough. Daniel's posture softened slightly. You're not losing me. I'm right here. Are you? She gestured around their kitchen, at the life they'd built together. Because it feels like you're pulling away. It feels like you're already half gone. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand, but Julianne moved back, needing space to think clearly. I need you to be honest with me. Do you have feelings for her? Daniel flinched as if she'd struck him. Jules, don't call me that right now, she interrupted. Not when you're about to lie to me. For several long seconds, they stood in silence, the distance between them seeming to expand with each passing moment. Then Daniel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I feel anymore. The admission hit Julianne like a physical blow. Despite her suspicions, despite the evidence she'd been collecting for weeks, some part of her had hoped she was wrong, that there was some other explanation for the changes in her husband. Hearing him acknowledge, even indirectly, that there were feelings involved made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. Are you sleeping with her? The question burned her throat on its way out. No. Daniel's response was immediate and forceful. It hasn't become physical. But you've thought about it, Julianne said. Not a question, but a statement. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was guilt written plainly across his features. I don't want to hurt you. That ship has sailed, Julianne said, surprised by the hollow laugh that escaped her. What happens now? Are you leaving? Is this where you tell me you want a divorce? No! The vehemence in his response seemed genuine. That's not what I want. Then what do you want, Daniel? Because you can't have both of us. Her husband sank into one of the kitchen chairs, looking suddenly exhausted. I want things to be like they were before, when we were happy. Were we? Julianne asked softly. Or were we just going through the motions, so busy with work and raising Mason that we didn't notice we were drifting apart? Daniel looked up at her, his eyes filled with a confusion that mirrored her own. I don't know when it happened. One day we were those people who couldn't keep our hands off each other, who stayed up all night talking about our dreams, and then we were this." He gestured between them. "People who live together but don't really see each other anymore." There was truth in his words, a truth that Julianne had been avoiding. It would be easier to cast Wendy Higgins as the villain in their story, the temptress who had lured her husband away. But the reality was more complicated. The distance between them had been growing long before Wendy entered the picture. She had simply stepped into a gap that already existed. "I want us to fight for this," Daniel said, his voice steadier now. "For our family, for what we built." Julianne studied him, searching for signs of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. He was still there, beneath the tailored suits and the carefully styled hair, beneath the ambition and the distance. The boy who had once written her love notes and left them in her architecture textbooks, who had promised to build a life with her where they would both thrive. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, "and I'm not sure what's left to fight for." Daniel stood, moving toward her slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Everything," he said. "Mason, our home, 12 years of history, the fact that despite everything, I still look for you in every room I enter." His words pierced through her anger, finding the part of her that still wanted to believe in them. "Words are easy, Daniel. It's actions that matter." "Then let me show you," he said. "I'll transfer departments, away from Wendy. I'll go to counseling. We can go together. Whatever it takes." Julianne felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. "You say that now, but what happens the next time you meet someone who makes you feel whatever she makes you feel?" "This isn't about Wendy," Daniel insisted. "It's about us, what we've lost, and what I want to find again." Upstairs, they heard Mason's bedroom door open, followed by the soft padding of small feet on the hallway carpet. "Mom?" His sleepy voice called down the stairs. "I had a bad dream." Julianne and Daniel exchanged a glance, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them despite everything. Their son needed them. Together or apart, that would never change. "We're not done with this conversation," Julianne said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I know." She turned toward the stairs, pulling herself together for Mason's sake. "I'm coming, sweetheart," she called up. "Everything's going to be okay." As she climbed the stairs to comfort their son, Julianne wondered if those words would prove to be true, if anything would ever be okay again. The foundation of her life had just been shaken, and she had no idea if it would stand or crumble beneath her. All she knew was that, tomorrow, she and Daniel would have to continue this conversation. Tomorrow, they would have to decide if their marriage was worth fighting for, or if the cracks had finally become too deep to repair. But tonight, she would hold her son close and tell him there were no monsters under his bed. Tonight, she would be the mother he needed, even as her own world tilted on its axis, even as she wondered if the life she had so carefully constructed was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Julianne stood at the counter, mechanically spreading peanut butter on Mason's sandwich, her movements automatic after years of morning routines. She had barely slept, replaying her conversation with Daniel in an endless loop throughout the night. Beside her, Mason sat at the breakfast bar, his spoon clinking against the cereal bowl as he ate, oblivious to the tension that had settled over the house like a heavy blanket. Daniel entered the kitchen, already dressed for work in a charcoal suit and blue tie. He paused in the doorway, his eyes finding Julianne's across the room. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the precipice they stood upon. "Good morning," he said, his voice deliberately casual for Mason's benefit. "Morning, Dad." Mason looked up, milk dribbling down his chin. "Can we go to the Science Museum this weekend? Tyler's dad took him, and he said they have a new dinosaur exhibit with real fossils you can touch." Daniel glanced at Julianne, uncertainty flashing across his face. Neither of them knew what their life would look like by the weekend. what promises they could make to their son. "We'll see, buddy," Daniel said finally, ruffling Mason's hair as he passed. "Sounds like fun, though." Julianne sliced the sandwich diagonally, the way Mason preferred, and placed it in his lunchbox. "Finish your cereal, sweetie. The bus will be here in 15 minutes. Daniel poured himself coffee, standing close enough that Julianne could smell his cologne, the familiar scent he had worn for years, not the new one she had mentioned last night. She wondered if the choice was deliberate, a small gesture meant to reassure her. "I called in to work," he said quietly. "Told them I needed a personal day." Julianne looked up, surprised. Daniel never took days off unexpectedly. In the 12 years they had been married, she could count on one hand the number of times he had called out sick. "Mason," she said, turning to their son, "why don't you go brush your teeth and get your backpack ready?" Mason groaned, but slid off the stool, taking a final spoonful of cereal before heading upstairs. When his footsteps had faded, Julianne turned back to Daniel. "Why did you take the day off?" Daniel set his coffee cup down carefully. "Because we need to talk, and this can't wait until after work. Not with everything that was said last night." Julianne nodded, grateful that he recognized the urgency, even as anxiety bloomed in her chest. "I need to get Mason on the bus first." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Finding Mason's missing library book, reminding him about his homework folder, hugging him tightly at the bus stop, as if he might disappear if she let go too soon. When the yellow bus finally pulled away, Julianne stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching until it turned the corner and vanished from sight. Then she walked slowly back to the house where her husband, and their uncertain future, waited. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, 2 fresh cups of coffee before him. He had loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar, looking less like the polished banker and more like the young man she had fallen in love with in college. The sight made her heart ache with a complicated mixture of love and betrayal. "I made you coffee," he said as she entered, sliding one of the mugs toward her. Julianne accepted it, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you." She sat across from him, the familiar table between them now feeling like neutral territory in contested land. "I spent all night thinking about what you said," Daniel began. "About us drifting apart, about Wendy." Julianne flinched slightly at the name, at the casual way it fell from his lips. And you're right." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been pulling away. I've been distracted by work, by my own ambitions, and yes, by her." "Do you love her?" The question burned in Julianne's throat, but she needed to know. Daniel shook his head immediately. "No, it's not love. I don't know what to call it. A distraction. An escape, maybe." "From what?" Julianne asked, trying to keep the hurt from her voice and failing. "From me? From our life together?" "Not from you," Daniel said, reaching across the table as if to take her hand, then thinking better of it. "From the person I've become. From this version of us that somehow lost its way." Julianne stared into her coffee, watching the light reflect off its surface. "I don't understand what that means." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Do you remember when we were first married? How we used to talk about everything? Your designs, my analysis projects, books, politics, the future. It felt like we were building something together, not just a home, but a vision." "I remember," Julianne said softly. Those early years had been filled with such possibility, such certainty, that they would create an extraordinary life together. Somewhere along the way, we stopped having those conversations. Daniel's voice dropped, heavy with regret. "We became efficient partners in running a household, in raising Mason, but we stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other." There was truth in his words that Julianne couldn't deny. She had felt it too, the slow erosion of their connection, the way they had become strangers living parallel lives. But acknowledging that mutual responsibility didn't erase the betrayal. "So you turned to someone else," she said. "Someone who made you feel seen again." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. It wasn't a conscious decision. Wendy joined the team 3 months ago, and at first it was just professional. She's smart, ambitious, reminds me a bit of you, actually. When we first met, we worked late on projects, started having lunch together occasionally. She laughed at my jokes, asked about my opinions, seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Each word was like a small cut, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Julianne could picture it all too clearly. The late nights at the office, the intimate conversations over takeout containers, the gradual shift from colleagues to something more. And I started looking forward to seeing her, Daniel continued, his voice thick with shame. Started thinking about her when I wasn't at work. Nothing physical has happened, Jules, I swear to you. But I can't sit here and tell you there isn't an emotional connection. That would be a lie. Julianne finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Would something physical have happened eventually, if I hadn't confronted you? The question hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Daniel's hesitation before answering told her everything she needed to know. I don't know, he admitted finally. I'd like to think I would have stopped it before it got to that point, but I can't swear to you that I would have been strong enough. His honesty was both devastating and necessary. Julianne felt tears prick at her eyes, but blinked them back. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've already emailed my transfer request, Daniel said. Thomas has been wanting me to head up the commercial analysis team for months. It's in a different building. I would never see Wendy. And you think that solves everything? Julianne couldn't keep the edge from her voice. You switched departments, and we pretend none of this happened? No, Daniel said firmly. That's just the first step. I also found a therapist. He pulled out his phone, sliding it across the table. On the screen was a website for Dr. Valerie Thompson, a psychologist specializing in couples therapy. I made an appointment for us, for tomorrow evening, if you're willing. Julianne stared at the phone, surprised by his initiative. You really want to try to fix this? More than anything. The certainty in Daniel's voice caught her off guard. Jules, last night after you went up with Mason, I sat in the kitchen for hours, looking at his drawing on the fridge, seeing our family through his eyes, seeing me separated from you both. It broke something in me. He leaned forward, his eyes imploring her to understand. I don't want to be that distant father, that absent husband. I don't want Mason growing up thinking that's what a marriage looks like. And I don't want to lose you, not to my own stupidity, not to my midlife crisis or whatever this is. Julianne wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to think they could find their way back to each other. But the image of Wendy's hand on his arm, of Daniel's bright eyes as he laughed at something she said, kept flashing through her mind. How do I trust you again? She asked, the question that had kept her awake all night. How do I know this won't happen the next time you feel unseen or unappreciated? I don't have an easy answer for that, Daniel admitted. Trust has to be rebuilt, day by day, action by action. I'm asking for the chance to earn it back. Julianne stood, needing to move, to put physical distance between them as she sorted through her feelings. She walked to the window overlooking their backyard, the swing set they had assembled together when Mason was 4, the garden beds she had planted each spring, the patio where they had hosted countless summer barbecues with friends and family. Their history was written in every inch of this space. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she said, her back to Daniel. The late nights, the changed passwords, the way you would smile at your phone when a message came through. I told myself I was being paranoid, that you would never betray us like that. She heard Daniel's chair scrape back, felt him approach, but stop several feet behind her, respecting her need for space. I betrayed your trust, he acknowledged, but I want you to know that this wasn't about you lacking something or not being enough. This was about me losing my way, forgetting what matters. Julianne turned to face him. When did we stop talking about the things that mattered? When did our conversations become limited to grocery lists, and Mason's soccer schedule. Daniel considered this, his brow furrowed. I think it happened gradually. After Mason was born, we were both so focused on being parents. Then my promotion came with more responsibility, longer hours. You were managing the household, volunteering at Mason's school. We were both exhausted at the end of each day. That's life, though, Julianne countered. That's what happens when you build a family together. You can't expect the excitement of dating to last forever. No, but you can expect connection to last, Daniel said. Intimacy, not just physical, but emotional. That's what we lost somewhere along the way. We stopped making time for each other, really seeing each other. Julianne couldn't argue with that assessment. She had felt the distance growing between them, but had attributed it to the natural evolution of a long marriage. She had told herself it was normal, that passion inevitably faded into comfortable companionship. But standing here now, facing the possibility of losing everything, she wondered if she had been too willing to accept that diminishment. I miss you, Daniel said softly. Even when we're in the same room, I miss the us we used to be. Heidi. His words echoed her own unspoken thoughts, and for the first time since their confrontation, Julianne felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps they weren't as far apart as she had feared, that perhaps there was still something worth fighting for. The appointment with Dr. Valerie, she said after a long pause. What time is it? 6:30 tomorrow evening. I already asked my mother if she can watch Mason. The fact that he had thought of these details, had taken concrete steps toward repairing what was broken between them, told Julianne something important about his intentions. Okay, she said. I'll go. Relief washed over Daniel's face. Thank you. I'm not making any promises, Julianne clarified. I don't know if we can fix this, but I'm willing to try, for Mason's sake, if nothing else. For Mason, Daniel agreed, and maybe, eventually, for us, too. Julianne nodded, not quite ready to commit to that hope aloud. What are you going to tell Wendy? Daniel's expression sobered. The truth, that I made a mistake by letting our relationship become inappropriate, that I'm committed to my marriage and my family, and I can't continue working closely with her. And if she doesn't take it well? Julianne asked, thinking of workplace complications, of a woman scorned. Then that's something I'll have to deal with, Daniel said firmly. But my priority is clear now. It's you and Mason. It always should have been. The statement hung between them, a promise Julianne wasn't yet sure she could fully trust. But it was a beginning, a foundation they might be able to rebuild upon. Her phone chimed with a text message. Glancing down, she saw it was from Iris, Daniel's mother. Your mom wants to know if we're still on for Sunday dinner, Julianne said, looking up at Daniel. What should I tell her? The question was loaded with meaning beyond its surface. Were they still a family that gathered for Sunday dinners? Were they still presenting a united front to the world? Daniel met her gaze steadily. Tell her yes. One day at a time, right? One day at a time, Julianne echoed, sending the response. As she set down her phone, she felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. The path forward was unclear, the wounds still fresh. But beneath the pain and uncertainty, there remained a connection forged through 12 years of shared history, the good and the bad, the joy and the struggle. They had built this life together, brick by brick. Perhaps they could find a way to repair its foundation, to shore up the weakened places, and make it stronger than before. Or, perhaps, they would discover that some damage could not be undone, that some betrayals cut too deep for healing. Either way, Julianne knew that the answer lay not in this morning's conversation, but in the days and weeks ahead, in actions rather than words, in consistent effort rather than momentary remorse. Time would reveal whether their marriage could withstand this test, or whether it would join the ranks of good intentions that crumbled under the weight of human frailty. For now, all they could do was take the first tentative step forward, into the uncertainty that waited beyond this kitchen, beyond this day, beyond the comfortable illusions they had lived with for too long. The waiting room of Dr. Valerie Thompson's office felt deliberately neutral. Soft beige walls adorned with abstract watercolors, comfortable but unremarkable furniture. A selection of magazines fanned out on the coffee table. Julianne sat rigidly on one end of a small sofa, her handbag clutched in her lap, while Daniel occupied the other end, the space between them conspicuous. A fish tank bubbled quietly in the corner, tropical fish darting between plastic plants. Julianne found herself fixated on one particular fish with bright blue scales that seemed determined to swim against the gentle current created by the filter. It reminded her of Mason, always moving counter to expectations, marching to his own rhythm. The Graysons! A woman appeared in the doorway, her voice warm and professional. Dr. Valerie was in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. She wore a simple navy dress with a cardigan, looking more like a favorite professor than a stereotypical therapist. "I'm Dr. Valerie. Please, come in." Daniel and Julianne followed her into a comfortable office with two armchairs positioned across from a small sofa. A desk occupied one corner of the room, but Dr. Valerie led them to the seating area, gesturing for them to take the armchairs while she settled on the sofa. "Before we begin, I want to thank you both for being here," she said, her gaze moving between them. "It takes courage to seek help, especially when you're navigating difficult waters in a relationship." Daniel nodded, his shoulders visibly tense beneath his button-down shirt. He had come straight from work, still wearing his office attire minus the tie, which he'd removed and stuffed into his pocket in the car. Julianne, having had more time to prepare, wore a simple sweater and jeans. Comfort prioritized over appearance for what she anticipated would be an uncomfortable conversation. "Daniel mentioned on the phone that you're dealing with some trust issues in your marriage," Dr. Valerie continued. "I'd like to hear from both of you about what brings you here today. But first, I want to emphasize that this is a safe space. My role isn't to judge or take sides, but to help you communicate more effectively and work through your challenges together." A moment of silence followed, neither Julianne nor Daniel eager to be the first to expose the raw wounds of their marriage. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I've betrayed my wife's trust," he said, his voice steady but strained. "Not physically, but emotionally. I allowed myself to develop feelings for someone at work, a colleague." Dr. Valerie's expression remained neutral, her pen making a brief note on the pad in her lap. "Julianne, how did you learn about this?" Julianne's hands tightened around her purse strap. "I suspected something was wrong for months." Daniel was working later than usual, being secretive with his phone. Then, 2 nights ago, at his company party, I saw them together. The way they interacted. She paused, the memory still sharp enough to make her wince. "I confronted him afterward." "And how did that conversation go?" Dr. Valerie asked. "It was honest," Daniel answered, before Julianne could speak. "Painfully honest. I admitted that I'd formed an inappropriate emotional attachment to my colleague, Wendy, that I'd been drawn to her attention, to how she made me feel." "And how did she make you feel, Daniel?" Dr. Valerie asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. Daniel glanced at Julianne, then back to the therapist. "Seen. Interesting. Like my thoughts and ideas mattered." He hesitated, then added, "Like I was more than just a provider, a father, a husband. Like I was still the person I used to be before all those responsibilities." The words stung, even though Julianne had suspected as much. "Did I make you feel like you weren't interesting?" she asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "Like your thoughts didn't matter?" "No, that's not," Daniel started, then stopped, recalibrating. "It's not that you did anything wrong, Jules. It's that we both got so caught up in the logistics of our life together that we stopped having the kinds of conversations we used to have. Everything became about schedules and bills and Mason's activities." Dr. Valerie made another note. "It sounds like you're describing a common pattern in long-term relationships. The shift from romantic partners to co-managers of a shared life. The excitement and deep connection of early relationship stages often gives way to more practical concerns, especially when children enter the picture. "Is that normal?" Julianne asked, seeking reassurance that their difficulties weren't unique, that they hadn't failed where others succeeded. "Completely normal," Dr. Valerie confirmed. "But normal doesn't mean it's what either of you want or need. The challenge is finding ways to maintain that deeper connection while also managing the practical aspects of building a life together." She turned to Daniel. "You mentioned that this relationship with your colleague hasn't become physical. Can you tell me more about the boundaries, or lack thereof, in that relationship?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We text outside of work hours, sometimes late at night. Nothing explicit, just conversations. About books we're reading, ideas, occasionally personal things. I've shared frustrations about work with her that I probably should have brought to Jules instead." "Have you taken steps to address this situation at work?" Dr. Valerie asked. "I've requested a transfer to a different department," Daniel said. "It was approved yesterday. I also spoke to Wendy, told her that our relationship had crossed professional boundaries and that I needed to recommit to my marriage. That conversation was difficult." Julianne looked up sharply. "You didn't tell me you'd already talked to her." Daniel met her gaze. "It happened yesterday afternoon. I was going to tell you, but then we were focused on getting ready for this appointment, and Mason needed help with his science project. How did she take it?" Julianne couldn't help asking, picturing this woman she had only seen once, imagining the conversation. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture Julianne recognized as discomfort. "Not well, initially. She was upset, said I'd given her the impression that I was unhappy in my marriage. She accused me of leading her on." "Had you?" Dr. Valerie asked, her tone neutral but direct. "Not intentionally," Daniel said after a pause, "but I can see how my actions might have suggested that. I never spoke negatively about Jules or our marriage, but I probably shared more than I should have about feeling disconnected, restless." Dr. Valerie turned to Julianne. "How are you feeling, hearing this?" Julianne took a deep breath. Hurt, angry, scared. She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. "Part of me understands what Daniel is saying about us losing our connection. I've felt it too, the distance growing between us. But another part of me thinks that's what happens in a marriage. The passion fades. You build something different, something steady. Does it have to be either or?" Dr. Valerie asked gently. "Either passion or stability?" The question hung in the air, challenging an assumption Julianne hadn't realized she'd been making, that the erosion of their romantic connection was inevitable, the natural progression of any long-term relationship. "I don't know," she admitted. "My parents had a practical marriage. They were partners, companions, but I rarely saw any romance or passion between them. I thought that was just how it works, eventually." "And you, Daniel?" Dr. Valerie turned to him. "What did marriage look like in your family of origin?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "My parents divorced when I was 12. My father had affairs, multiple affairs. He was present physically, but absent emotionally, always chasing the next thrill, the next woman who would make him feel young and exciting again." His voice tightened. "I swore I would never be like him, that I would be faithful, present, committed. And yet, here we are," Julianne said softly, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "Here we are," Daniel echoed, shame evident in his face, "following patterns I promised myself I would break." Dr. Valerie leaned forward slightly. "It's important to recognize those patterns, but also to recognize where you've diverged from them. Daniel, unlike your father, you've chosen to confront this situation before it became physical. You've taken responsibility and are actively seeking to repair your relationship. That's significant." She looked between them. "Both of you have mentioned feeling disconnected, but I wonder, when did you first notice that disconnect? Can you identify a turning point?" Julianne and Daniel exchanged glances, each trying to pinpoint when the subtle shift had occurred. After Mason was born, Julianne said finally, we were both exhausted, overwhelmed. I was struggling with the transition from career woman to stay-at-home mom. Daniel was working longer hours to support us on one income. We stopped talking about anything that wasn't directly related to survival or parenting. Daniel nodded in agreement. The first few years with Mason, we were just trying to keep our heads above water. By the time things settled into a routine, that routine didn't include the kind of connection we used to have. We never consciously rebuilt it. That's a very common experience for new parents, Dr. Valerie assured them. The demands of raising children, particularly in those early years, can consume all your available energy and attention. But Mason is 8 now, Julianne pointed out. We've had time to find our footing, to reconnect. Why haven't we? Because reconnection requires intention, Dr. Valerie said. It doesn't just happen naturally once the initial crisis of new parenthood passes. It requires both partners to recognize what's been lost and make a conscious effort to rebuild it. She set her notepad aside, leaning forward. I'd like to try something if you're both willing. Daniel, can you tell Julianne one thing you miss about your earlier relationship? Something specific, not general. Daniel turned toward Julianne, their eyes meeting for what felt like the first time in years. Truly meeting, not just passing over each other in the course of daily interactions. I miss our Sunday mornings, he said, his voice softening with the memory. When we would wake up early but stay in bed for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Your hair spread across the pillow, the way the light would come through the curtains, how we would make elaborate plans for trips we'd take someday, houses we'd design together. You'd sketch ideas on napkins while I calculated how many years of saving it would take. We were building castles in the air, but they felt possible because we were creating them together. But Keats, the specificity of the memory, the details Daniel had preserved all these years, caught Julianne off guard. Tears pricked at her eyes as she remembered those mornings, the sense of infinite possibility they had contained. Julianne, Dr. Valerie prompted gently, is there something specific you miss? Julianne swallowed past the tightness in her throat. I miss how we used to walk together after dinner, around the neighborhood, sometimes talking, sometimes just in silence. You would take my hand automatically, without thinking about it, and occasionally, for no reason at all, you would stop under a streetlight and pull me into a dance, humming whatever song was stuck in your head that day. It was silly and romantic and completely unself-conscious. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised she had kept this memory so close. I didn't think you cared about those moments. You always acted embarrassed. I pretended to be embarrassed, Julianne corrected him, but I loved it. I loved that you were still the same guy who had danced with me in the fountain on our second date, even after years of marriage and a mortgage and parenthood. A small smile tugged at Daniel's lips. I haven't danced with you in years, have I? No, Julianne confirmed softly. You haven't. Dr. Valerie watched this exchange with approval. What you're both describing are moments of connection, not grand gestures, but small, intimate rituals that made you feel seen and valued by each other. Those rituals often fall away as relationships mature, but they're crucial for maintaining emotional intimacy. She glanced at the clock. We're nearing the end of our time for today, but I'd like to suggest a homework assignment, if you're willing. Between now and our next session, I'd like each of you to reintroduce one small ritual of connection from your earlier relationship. It could be those walks after dinner, or setting aside time on Sunday mornings to just talk. The specific activity matters less than the intention behind it, creating space where you can be fully present with each other, not as parents or household managers, but as partners. Julianne and Daniel nodded, the assignment feeling both simple and terrifyingly vulnerable. Also, Dr. Valerie continued, I'd like you both to spend some time reflecting on what you need from this relationship moving forward. Not just what you miss from the past, but what you want your marriage to look like in the future. What kind of partnership, would make you feel fulfilled, secure, and connected. We'll discuss those visions in our next session. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Dr. Valerie added one final thought. Rebuilding trust after it's been broken is challenging work. It requires consistent effort from both parties, transparency and reliability from the person who broke the trust, and a willingness to risk vulnerability again from the person who was hurt. But I've seen many couples navigate this journey successfully. The fact that you're both here, willing to do this work, is a promising start. In the car, on the way to pick up Mason from his grandmother's house, Julianne and Daniel rode in silence, each processing the session in their own way. The space between them on the front seat felt different now, still present, but perhaps a few inches narrower than before. "What did you think?" Daniel finally asked, glancing at her before returning his eyes to the road. "It was helpful," Julianne admitted. "Harder than I expected, but good." Daniel nodded, his hands flexing on the steering wheel. "I meant what I said in there, Jules, about missing those Sunday mornings, about missing us." Julianne looked out the passenger window at the familiar streets of their neighborhood sliding past, the houses with their glowing windows, families inside living out their own private dramas of connection and disconnection, love and disappointment, betrayal and forgiveness. Each home a container for the messy complexity of human relationships. "I know you did," she said softly. "I miss us too." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a promise that they would find their way back to each other, but it was an acknowledgement that there was still something between them worth excavating from beneath the layers of hurt and neglect, something precious they had both allowed to be buried, but not quite forgotten. As they pulled into Iris's driveway, Julianne found herself wondering what Daniel would choose as his ritual of connection. What gesture from their past he would resurrect in an attempt to bridge the chasm between them. And she wondered, with equal parts hope and fear, whether it would be enough, whether they could rebuild what had been damaged, or if they would need to create something entirely new from the broken pieces of what once was. Mason burst out of the front door before they could even exit the car, his face alight with excitement. "Mom! Dad! Grandma let me make cookies and I saved some for you. And I built the tallest block tower ever, but then it fell and made a super loud crash." As Mason climbed into the back seat, chattering about his evening, Julianne caught Daniel's eye over their son's head. In that brief glance was a shared recognition of what was at stake in the work they had begun today. Not just their own happiness, but the intact world of this exuberant child who loved them both with uncomplicated devotion. For his sake, if nothing else, they needed to find a path forward, whatever shape it might take. The Sunday morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, catching in the steam rising from Julianne's coffee mug. She sat at the counter in her robe, watching Mason sprawled on the living room floor, absorbed in constructing an elaborate racetrack for his toy cars. The house was quiet, save for the occasional plastic click of track pieces connecting, and Mason's whispered sound effects. It had been 3 days since their first session with Dr. Valerie, 3 days of cautious politeness between her and Daniel, of careful navigation around the broken places in their relationship. They had both returned to the routines of daily life, lunches packed, laundry folded, dinner prepared and eaten. But beneath these familiar rhythms ran a current of uncertainty, of questions still unanswered. Daniel appeared in the doorway, freshly showered, his hair still damp. Instead of his usual weekend attire of old jeans and a faded t-shirt, he wore newer jeans and a button-down shirt she hadn't seen him wear in months. The subtle effort in his appearance didn't escape her notice. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Sleep okay?" "Well enough." The truth was more complicated. She'd lain awake long past midnight, her mind cycling through memories and worries, before finally falling into restless sleep. But detailed honesty about her emotional state still felt too vulnerable, too exposing. Daniel glanced at Mason, ensuring he was out of earshot, then lowered his voice. I was thinking about Dr. Valerie's assignment, the ritual of connection. Julianne nodded, her fingers tightening around her mug. She had been thinking about it too, trying to decide which fragment of their past she wanted to reclaim. If you're up for it, Daniel continued, I thought maybe we could go for a walk after breakfast, like we used to, just around the neighborhood. The suggestion caught her by surprise. Not the walk itself, but the fact that he had chosen the ritual she had mentioned during their therapy session. It was a small acknowledgement that he had truly heard her, had recognized what had been meaningful to her. I'd like that, she said after a moment. Mason could ride his bike alongside us. Daniel shook his head slightly. Actually, I asked my mom if she could take him to the Children's Museum this morning, the dinosaur exhibit he's been talking about. She'll be here at 10 to pick him up. Julianne felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being alone with Daniel for an extended period. Their interactions since the confrontation had been conducted primarily in Mason's presence, his innocent chatter filling the silences between them. The prospect of sustained one-on-one time felt both necessary and frightening. Okay, she agreed, setting down her coffee. A walk would be nice. Iris arrived promptly at 10, her energy filling the house as she swept in with plans for the day and a bag of snacks for Mason. If she sensed the tension between her son and daughter-in-law, she had the grace not to mention it, focusing instead on Mason's excitement about the dinosaur exhibit. We'll be back around 3, she told them, shepherding Mason toward the door. Take your time. Enjoy your morning. As the door closed behind them, the house fell into a silence that felt suddenly vast. Julianne and Daniel stood in the entryway, the absence of their son creating a vacuum neither seemed to know how to fill. Should we go? Daniel finally asked, reaching for his light jacket. Outside, the October morning was crisp but pleasant, the trees along their street displaying the first hints of autumn color. They walked side by side, not touching, the familiar sidewalks of their neighborhood stretching before them, houses they had passed hundreds of times over the years, gardens they had watched transform through seasons, neighbors they greeted with waves and nods, the landscape of their shared life. For the first 10 minutes, they walked in silence, the space between them occupied only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional passing car. Julianne found herself remembering how easily conversation had flowed between them in the early days, how they could talk for hours without effort or awkwardness. When had that changed? When had silence become their default state? I went to see Thomas yesterday, Daniel said finally, breaking the quiet, to confirm my department transfer. Julianne glanced at him. How did that go? He was surprised but supportive. Daniel kept his eyes on the sidewalk ahead. Asked if everything was okay. I told him I needed a change, new challenges. He didn't push for more details. And the transfer is definite? You'll be completely separate from her? Julianne still couldn't bring herself to say Wendy's name casually, as if she were just another colleague. Daniel nodded. Different floor, different team, different projects. The paperwork is processed. I start in the new department on Monday. Relief washed through Julianne, though she knew the physical separation was only part of the solution. The emotional entanglement wasn't something that could be resolved by a change in office location. Have you? She hesitated, not sure she wanted the answer to her next question. Have you spoken to her again, since you told her about recommitting to our marriage? Daniel's pace slowed slightly. She sent me a text yesterday, asked if we could talk. I didn't respond. Will you? Julianne asked, her voice carefully neutral. No. The firmness in his tone was reassuring. There's nothing more to say. I made my choice clear. Engaging further would only complicate things. They turned onto a tree-lined path that wound through the small neighborhood park where Mason had learned to ride his bike. The memory of that day surfaced in Julianne's mind. Daniel running alongside their son, holding the back of the bicycle seat, Mason's face a mixture of terror and determination, her own heart in her throat, as Daniel finally let go. and Mason pedaled forward on his own for the first time. "Do you remember teaching Mason to ride his bike here?" she asked, the shared memory offering a safe point of connection. Daniel's expression softened. Of course. He was so scared but so stubborn. Refused to give up, even after falling 3 times. "He gets that from you," Julianne said. "That determination. And his creativity from you." Daniel smiled slightly. The cardboard city he built in the garage last month was impressive. All those detailed buildings, the little people he drew. He's got your eye for design. They continued walking, the conversation shifting to Mason, his recent school projects, his developing personality, his future. Their son remained the one topic they could discuss without strain or guardedness, the one part of their life where their love and investment remained perfectly aligned. As they approached the pond at the center of the park, Daniel slowed his pace. "Jules, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. About Wendy." Julianne tensed, unsure if she was ready for more revelations. "What about her?" "It wasn't about her specifically," he said carefully. "I need you to understand that. It wasn't about her being more attractive or interesting or special than you. It was about—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It was about feeling like the version of myself I used to be, before responsibilities and routines took over." Julianne considered this, trying to separate her hurt from her understanding. "I think I get that," she said finally. "I've felt it too, missing the person I was before, more carefree, more passionate about my work, more seen for something other than being a wife and mother." Daniel looked at her with surprise, as if this admission was unexpected. "You never said anything." "Neither did you," she pointed out. "We both just accepted it, I guess. Assumed it was the natural progression of things." They reached a bench overlooking the pond, and Daniel gestured to it. "Can we sit for a minute?" Julianne nodded, settling on one end of the bench while Daniel took the other, the middle space between them a physical manifestation of their emotional distance. "I've been thinking a lot about what Dr. Valerie said," Daniel began, "about how reconnection requires intention, about how we never consciously rebuilt our connection after Mason was born." "And do you think we can?" Julianne asked, voicing the question that had haunted her for days. "Rebuild it, I mean. After everything." Daniel turned to face her more directly. "I want to try. Really try. Not just go through the motions." His eyes met hers with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "But I need to know if you do too. If there's still enough left between us that's worth fighting for." The question hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Julianne gazed out at the pond, watching a pair of ducks glide across its surface, seemingly effortless in their connection. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me loves you, the history we've built, the family we've created. But another part of me is so hurt, so angry, that you almost threw it all away, that you went looking for connection with someone else instead of trying to rebuild it with me." Daniel nodded, accepting her honesty without defense. "I understand that, and I'll accept whatever you decide, Jules. But I want you to know that if you're willing to try, I'm ready to put in the work. Real work, not just temporary fixes or empty promises." As they sat in contemplative silence, an elderly couple walked past, hand in hand. The man leaned heavily on a cane, while the woman adjusted her pace to match his, their movements synchronized by decades of practice. The woman laughed at something he said, the sound bright in the morning air, and he beamed at her with undisguised adoration. "Do you think they've always been happy?" Julianne asked softly, watching the couple continue down the path. "Or do you think they had moments like this too? Times when they almost lost each other?" Daniel followed her gaze. "I'd bet they've weathered their share of storms. No relationship that long comes without challenges. But they found their way back to each other," Julianne observed. "They're still holding hands after all these years. Maybe that's the secret," Daniel suggested. "Not avoiding the storms, but learning how to weather them together. coming out the other side stronger. The simplicity of his observation resonated with Julianne. Perhaps they had been expecting too much. A marriage without conflict, without periods of distance, without the need for constant renewal. Perhaps the true measure of a successful relationship wasn't the absence of challenges, but the willingness to face them together, to continually choose each other despite them. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, then quickly silenced it and returned it to his pocket. Was that her? Julianne couldn't help asking, the old fear resurfacing. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but I'm not answering. Show me, Julianne said, the request emerging before she could consider its wisdom. Daniel looked surprised. Jules, I don't think that's… Please, she interrupted. I need to see it. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel pulled out his phone and handed it to her. On the screen was a text notification from W.H. Wendy Higgins, Julianne presumed. The message preview read, Daniel, we need to talk. This isn't just about us anymore. There's something you should… The preview cut off there, the rest of the message hidden unless she opened it. Julianne stared at the screen, her heart racing. What did that mean? This isn't just about us anymore? What was the something Daniel should know? She handed the phone back to him, her hand trembling slightly. What do you think she means? Daniel shook his head, his expression troubled. I don't know, but whatever it is, it doesn't change anything. My decision is made. Aren't you curious? Julianne pressed. What if it's important? Nothing she has to say is more important than what we're doing right now, Daniel said firmly, trying to save our marriage. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and Julianne found it difficult to return to the openness of their earlier conversation. The text message hovered between them now, an unwelcome reminder of the third person who had entered their relationship. They rose from the bench by silent mutual agreement and continued their walk, the easy rhythm of their earlier exchange replaced by a heavier silence. As they neared their street, Daniel stopped suddenly. Wait here for a second, he said, then jogged ahead to their house, leaving Julianne puzzled on the sidewalk. He returned moments later with something in his hand, a small portable speaker. Before she could ask what he was doing, he set it on a nearby retaining wall and pressed play. The opening notes of At Last by Etta James filled the quiet Sunday morning air. Daniel, what are you… Julianne began, but stopped as he extended his hand to her. Dance with me, he said simply. Right here, under this maple tree, like we used to. Julianne stared at his outstretched hand, memories flooding back, of countless impromptu dances on evening walks, of the way he used to pull her close without warning and sway with her to whatever melody was in his head. The neighbors will see, she protested weakly, glancing around at the surrounding houses. Daniel's hand remained steady. Let them see me dancing with my wife on a Sunday morning. Seat. Something about the earnestness in his expression, the vulnerability of the gesture, broke through her reserve. Julianne placed her hand in his, allowing him to draw her closer. His other hand settled at her waist, while hers found his shoulder, the familiar position feeling simultaneously strange and right. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first, then with increasing fluidity, as muscle memory took over. The rich, soulful voice of Etta James surrounded them, singing of dreams coming true, of skies of blue. Daniel held her gaze, not looking away even when she felt her eyes grow damp with unexpected tears. I've missed this, he said quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the music. I've missed you, Jules. The honesty in his words, the genuine regret and longing in his eyes, touched something deep within her, a place that had remained tender and hopeful, despite the hurt of recent days. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a willingness to remember, to acknowledge what had once been beautiful between them, what might still be salvaged. As the song drew to a close, Daniel slowed their movement but didn't release her. Instead, he brought his hand to her face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "One day at a time," he said softly, echoing their agreement from earlier that week. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to show you day by day that I'm still the man you married, that I can be better than I've been." Julianne looked up at him, seeing beyond the polished banker to the earnest college student who had once promised to love her forever, who had built pillow forts with her in their first tiny apartment, who had held her hand through 20 hours of labor when Mason was born. That man was still there, beneath the layers of career ambition and routine, beneath the mistakes and missteps of recent months. "One day at a time," she agreed, stepping back from his embrace but keeping hold of his hand as they walked the remaining distance to their home. The text message from Wendy still troubled her, a reminder that the repercussions of Daniel's emotional affair might not be fully resolved. But for this moment, on this quiet Sunday morning, Julianne allowed herself to hope that perhaps they could find their way back, not to what they had been before, but to something new, something stronger for having been tested. As they reached their front porch, Daniel's phone buzzed again in his pocket. This time, he didn't check it, keeping his attention focused solely on his wife. It was a small gesture, but one that didn't go unnoticed. A choice being made, a priority being established, one moment at a time. The sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the quiet Tuesday evening, startling Julianne from her focus on the kitchen counter, where she was helping Mason with his math homework. Daniel looked up from his laptop, exchanging a puzzled glance with her across the room. They weren't expecting visitors, and their neighborhood wasn't one for unannounced drop-ins, especially on weeknights. "I'll get it," Daniel said, rising from the couch where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports. Julianne nodded, turning her attention back to Mason's fraction problems, but keeping one ear trained on the front door. The past 10 days since their walk in the park had been a careful dance of rebuilding. Small gestures, moments of connection, the gradual easing of tension. Their second session with Dr. Valerie had been yesterday, another step forward in understanding the patterns that had led them astray and the work needed to find their way back. She heard the front door open, followed by Daniel's voice, suddenly tense. "Wendy, what are you doing here?" Julianne froze, her hand tightening on Mason's pencil. "Mom?" Mason looked up, confused by her sudden stillness. "Are you okay?" "Yes, honey," she managed, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about something." "Why don't you try the next problem on your own? I'll be right back." She rose from the stool, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her as she moved toward the entryway. The sound of a woman's voice, urgent, insistent, reached her before she turned the corner. "You've been ignoring my calls and messages for over a week," the voice was saying. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." Julianne stepped into the entryway, her heart pounding. Daniel stood in the doorway, his body language rigid, blocking the entrance. Beyond him, on the front porch, stood a woman Julianne recognized from the bank party. Wendy Higgins, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, wearing a tailored blazer over jeans, looking both professional and determined. "Daniel?" Julianne's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What's going on?" He turned, his face a mask of conflicted emotions, anger, concern, guilt. "Nothing. Wendy was just leaving." "No, I wasn't," Wendy countered, shifting to see past Daniel to where Julianne stood. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, moved between them. "You must be Julianne. I think we should talk, all of us." "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel insisted, his voice tight. "I've made my position clear. Whatever you think is so important can be handled through HR or legal if necessary." Wendy's expression hardened. "Is that what you think this is about? A workplace harassment claim?" She shook her head. "This is much more personal than that, and you know it." A sick feeling washed over Julianne. Had Daniel lied to her? Had their relationship been more than emotional after all? "Mom!" Mason's voice came from behind her. "Who's at the door?" Julianne turned to find her son standing in the hallway, curiosity written across his face. "Just someone from Dad's work, sweetheart. Go back to your homework. I'll be there in a minute." Mason hesitated, his perceptive eyes taking in the tension radiating from the adults. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Daniel assured him, his voice gentling. "This won't take long." After a moment's hesitation, Mason retreated to the kitchen, throwing one last curious glance over his shoulder. Daniel turned back to Wendy, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. "You shouldn't have come to my home. Whatever you need to say, this isn't the place." "I tried reaching you every other way," Wendy said, her own voice lowered but intense. "I'm not here to make trouble for you or your family, but there's something you need to know, and it couldn't wait any longer." Julianne stepped forward, a sudden clarity cutting through her confusion and hurt. "Let her in, Daniel." Both Daniel and Wendy looked at her with surprise. "Jules, you don't have to," Daniel began. "I want to hear what she has to say," Julianne interrupted, surprising herself with her steady resolve. "Whatever it is, we should deal with it directly. No more secrets, no more avoidance." After a moment's hesitation, Daniel stepped aside, allowing Wendy to enter. An uncomfortable silence fell as the three adults stood in the entryway, none certain how to proceed. "We can talk in the study," Julianne said finally, leading the way to the small room off the living room that served as their home office. Once inside, she closed the door, acutely aware of Mason in the kitchen, just out of earshot. Daniel remained standing, his posture defensive, while Julianne perched on the edge of the desk. Wendy stood near the bookshelf, her composure beginning to crack slightly now that she was actually inside their home. "What's so urgent that you needed to come to our house?" Daniel asked, his tone clipped. Wendy took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, devastating in their simplicity. Julianne felt the room tilt around her, her grip on the desk edge tightening until her knuckles went white. "That's impossible," Daniel said, his face draining of color. "We never—" "Not yours," Wendy clarified quickly, her eyes moving to Julianne. "I'm not saying it's Daniel's child. We never had that kind of relationship." Relief washed over Julianne so powerfully that she nearly swayed where she sat. "Then whose—" she began, before understanding dawned. "Thomas, your boss." Wendy nodded, some of her earlier confidence faltering. "Yes, Thomas and I have been involved for 6 months. It's complicated. He's married, has children. When I told him about the pregnancy last week, he panicked, said he needed time to figure things out." Her voice caught. "Yesterday, he called me into his office and told me he's arranged a transfer for me to the Seattle branch, effective immediately." The pieces began falling into place in Julianne's mind. "And you think Daniel can help somehow? Intervene with Thomas?" Wendy's gaze shifted to Daniel. "I thought he should know the truth. About Thomas. About why I turned to Daniel for friendship. Why I might have crossed lines I shouldn't have." He swallowed hard. "Thomas has always been jealous. When he saw us together at the holiday party, how well we got along, he assumed there was something happening. I didn't correct him because I was hurt by how he was treating me, how secretive he was being about our relationship. So you used me," Daniel said, his voice flat, "to make him jealous." "Not initially," Wendy insisted. "Our friendship was real. I valued our conversations, your insights. But yes, I let it become something more in Thomas's mind. And then, when you suddenly pulled away, requested a transfer," she shook her head. "Thomas took it as confirmation that there had been something between us. He accused me of being unfaithful, used it as an excuse to distance himself when I told him about the baby." Julianne watched Daniel's face as Wendy spoke, saw the complex emotions crossing his features, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a dawning comprehension. "The text you sent," he said, "about it not being just about us anymore, you meant the baby." Wendy nodded. "I needed you to know the truth, not just for my sake, but because Thomas is using you, using the idea of our non-existent affair to avoid his responsibilities. He's planning to tell his wife that he's been suspecting inappropriate behavior between us at work. That's why he's been distant. He's creating a narrative where he's the victim, not the one who's been having an actual affair for months. The room fell silent as they absorbed this information, the tangled web of deception and consequences that had ensnared them all. "Why tell us this now?" Julianne asked finally. "Why not just accept the transfer and start fresh in Seattle?" Wendy's professional facade crumbled further, revealing the vulnerability beneath. "Because I can't let him get away with this. With using Daniel as a scapegoat, with abandoning his child, with lying to everyone. And because—" She hesitated, her eyes meeting Julianne's directly for the first time. "Because I saw you two at the party, before everything fell apart. I saw how you looked at each other when you thought no one was watching, like there was still something worth fighting for." Julianne felt Daniel's gaze on her, but kept her focus on Wendy. "There is," she said quietly. "We're working on it." Wendy nodded, a flash of regret crossing her features. "I'm sorry for my part in complicating things. Whatever encouragement I may have given Daniel, whatever boundaries I failed to respect, that was wrong. I was lonely, confused about my own situation. But that's no excuse." Daniel moved closer to Julianne, not touching her, but standing near enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. "What do you want from us, Wendy? Why tell us all this?" Wendy straightened, regaining some of her composure. "I want Thomas to take responsibility for his actions, for this child. I'm not asking him to leave his wife or upend his life, but I won't let him pretend this baby doesn't exist or use you as cover for his own indiscretions." "And you think I can somehow make that happen?" Daniel asked skeptically. "You're respected at the bank," Wendy said. "Your voice carries weight. If you spoke to him, made it clear that you know the truth." "Cheat." Julianne watched her husband's expression shift, saw him weighing this unexpected request against his own recent mistakes, his own journey toward accountability. "I'll talk to him," Daniel said finally. "Not for you, but because it's the right thing to do. Children deserve fathers who step up, who take responsibility." He glanced at Julianne. "And because I know something about facing the consequences of your actions, about owning your mistakes instead of running from them." Relief washed over Wendy's face. "Thank you." "You should go now," Julianne said, not unkindly. "Our son is waiting, and we have a lot to discuss." Wendy nodded, gathering her composure. As Daniel led her to the front door, Julianne remained in the study, trying to process this unexpected twist in their already complicated situation. When Daniel returned, he stood in the doorway, uncertainty written across his features. "Jules, I swear to you, I never—" "I know," she interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I believe you." Daniel looked momentarily stunned. "You do?" Julianne nodded, rising from the desk to face him directly. "If there's one thing I've learned these past weeks, it's how to recognize when you're telling me the truth." Your reaction to her announcement, that wasn't guilt or fear of being exposed. That was genuine shock. The tension visibly drained from Daniel's shoulders. "Thank you for trusting me with that. After everything, I wouldn't have blamed you for assuming the worst." "A month ago I might have," Julianne admitted, "but we've been doing the work, Daniel. In therapy, at home, I'm starting to see you clearly again. Not just the mistakes you've made, but the man you're trying to be." Daniel crossed the room slowly, stopping just before her. "And do you think that man is worth holding on to?" The question hung between them, weighted with all that had happened, all that might still be possible. Julianne thought of their dance in the park, of the Sunday morning breakfast Daniel had made for the family 2 days ago, of the handwritten note she'd found in her wallet yesterday. Small gestures rebuilding a foundation that had been cracked but not destroyed. "Yes," she said softly, "I do." Daniel's eyes filled with an emotion so raw and grateful that it took her breath away. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "I love you, Jules. I never stopped, even when I lost my way. And I promise you, I will spend every day making sure you never doubt that again." Julianne felt something shift within her. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a willingness to move forward, to believe in the possibility of redemption, of renewal. One day at a time, she reminded him, echoing their ongoing promise to each other. One day at a time, he agreed, squeezing her hands gently. A knock on the study door broke the moment. "Mom? Dad?" Mason called through the wood. "Is everything okay?" "I finished my math problems." They exchanged a smile, the shared love for their son a bridge connecting them even in their most difficult moments. "Everything's fine, honey," Julianne called back. "We'll be right there." 6 months later, Julianne stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Daniel as he sat on the edge of their bed, gently cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. The late spring sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating a warm glow around father and daughter as Daniel whispered softly to the baby, his expression one of wonder and devotion. The path to this moment had not been smooth or straightforward. There had been difficult conversations, painful revelations, moments of doubt and fear. Thomas had eventually taken responsibility for his child with Wendy, though their situation remained complicated. Daniel had kept his promise to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, focusing his energy and attention where it belonged, on his family, on rebuilding what had nearly been lost. Dr. Valerie had guided them through months of therapy, helping them identify the patterns that had led them astray, teaching them new ways to communicate, to connect, to stay present with each other, even amid the demands of daily life. They had learned to create deliberate spaces for intimacy, not just physical, but emotional and intellectual as well. Sunday morning conversations in bed, evening walks hand in hand after Mason was asleep, date nights where phones were left at home, and they rediscovered the simple pleasure of giving each other their undivided attention. And then, 4 months into their journey of reconciliation, came the unexpected news. Julianne was pregnant. The baby they had once hoped for, but eventually stopped trying to conceive, had chosen this moment to enter their lives, a testament to the renewed connection they had fought so hard to restore. "She has your eyes," Daniel said softly, looking up and noticing Julianne in the doorway. That same intense gaze, like she's figuring out the whole world at once. Julianne moved into the room, settling beside him on the bed and leaning against his shoulder to gaze down at their daughter. "And your dimple," she observed, touching the tiny indentation that appeared when the baby yawned. "Poor thing." Daniel laughed softly. "Hey, you once told me that dimple was what made you agree to a second date." "Did I?" Julianne teased. "I must have been trying to spare your feelings. It was definitely your taste in music that won me over." This easy banter, the ability to tease and laugh together, it had returned gradually over the months, a gift they no longer took for granted. Every smile, every shared joke, every moment of genuine connection was appreciated anew, treasured for the hard-won victory it represented. A light knock sounded on the bedroom door, and Mason peeked in, his expression a mixture of curiosity and the careful pride of a new big brother. "Can I come in? I finished my homework." "Of course." Julianne patted the space beside her. "Come meet your sister properly. She's awake for once." Mason approached cautiously, climbing onto the bed and peering down at the newborn with studied concentration. "She's so tiny," he observed. "Was I that small?" "Even smaller," Daniel told him, carefully transferring the baby to Mason's waiting arms, helping him support her head correctly. "You were in such a hurry to meet us that you arrived 3 weeks early." Mason looked down at his sister with sudden seriousness. "I'm going to teach her everything," he declared. "How to build the best block towers and draw dinosaurs and ride a bike." "I'm sure she can't wait," Julianne said, her heart full as she watched her children together for the first time, the boy who had been their first miracle, the daughter who represented their second chance. Later that evening, after Mason had gone to bed, and the baby was asleep in her bassinet, Julianne and Daniel stood on their back porch, the spring night air cool but pleasant around them. Daniel's arm rested lightly around her waist. Her head leaned against his shoulder, their bodies finding the familiar contours that had always fit together so perfectly. "I've been thinking about names," Daniel said quietly, "for the baby." They had decided to wait until after her birth to name her, wanting to meet her first, to see who she might be before assigning her an identity she would carry through life. "And?" Julianne prompted, curious. They had discussed various possibilities, but hadn't settled on anything definitive. "What about Hope?" Daniel suggested. "It seems fitting, given everything we've been through, what she represents for us." Julianne tested the name silently, imagining calling it across a playground, writing it on school forms, hearing it announced at a graduation ceremony someday. "Hope Grayson," she said aloud. "I like it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the name settling between them, becoming real. "I never thought we'd be here," Daniel admitted softly. "6 months ago, I was terrified I'd lost you forever, that I'd destroyed everything that mattered." Julianne turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "There were moments I thought so too," she acknowledged. "Days when the hurt seemed too deep to heal." "What changed?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Julianne considered this, thinking back over their journey. "We changed," she said finally. "Both of us. You found the courage to be honest, with yourself, with me, to do the work instead of looking for easy escapes. And I found the strength to risk being vulnerable again, to believe that what we had was worth fighting for." Daniel pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I will never take you for granted again," he promised. "Never stop seeing you, hearing you, choosing you, every single day. Even when I'm sleep-deprived and cranky with spit up in my hair," Julianne teased, lightening the moment. "Especially then," Daniel assured her, smiling. "That's when you're most magnificent." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "I have something for you." Julianne looked at him with surprise. "Daniel? It's not what you think," he said, opening the box to reveal not a ring, but a delicate silver pendant, 2 intertwined circles, one slightly larger than the other. "I saw this and thought of us, how our lives are connected but distinct, how we each need to be whole on our own, to truly be strong together." Tears pricked at Julianne's eyes as she lifted the necklace from its velvet bed. "It's beautiful." Daniel took it from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. Dr. Valerie talks about interdependence versus codependence, how healthy relationships require 2 complete people choosing to build something together, not 2 broken halves trying to complete each other. Julianne touched the pendant where it rested against her skin. "When did you become so wise?" "Around the time I almost lost everything that matters," Daniel said, his voice serious despite his slight smile. "Nothing clarifies your priorities quite like that." From inside the house came the faint sound of Hope beginning to stir, her tiny cries growing more insistent. Julianne and Daniel exchanged a glance, the silent communication of parents already attuned to their child's needs. "I'll get her," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to Julianne's forehead. "You've been on duty all day. Take a few more minutes out here for yourself." As he turned to go inside, Julianne caught his hand. "Daniel?" He paused, looking back at her. "Yes? I love you," she said simply. "Not despite everything we've been through, but because of it. Because of who we've become through weathering the storm together." The smile that spread across Daniel's face was like sunrise breaking over the horizon, bright with promise, with possibilities yet to unfold. "I love you too, Jules. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." As he disappeared into the house to tend to their daughter, Julianne remained on the porch for a moment longer, her fingers tracing the intertwined circles of her new necklace. The past year had taken them to the brink of losing everything, had shown them how fragile even the strongest bonds could be when neglected, how easily connection could erode under the pressures of daily life. But it had also revealed something else, the remarkable capacity for renewal, for forgiveness, for building something stronger from the broken pieces of what once was. Their marriage was not the same as it had been before the crisis that had nearly torn them apart. It was deeper, more intentional, fortified by the knowledge of what it meant to nearly lose each other and find their way back. Inside, she could hear Daniel's voice, soft and melodic, as he sang to their daughter. The same lullaby he had once sung to Mason, the melody a thread connecting past to present, weaving their family story together across time. Julianne smiled, looking up at the stars emerging in the evening sky, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Not the complacent comfort she had once mistaken for happiness, but something richer and more profound. The hard-won serenity of knowing that love, real love, wasn't about perfect moments or grand gestures, but about choosing each other anew each day, about doing the work even when it was difficult, about building a life together one moment at a time. With one last glance at the night sky, Julianne turned and walked back into the warmth of her home, toward the husband and children who waited for her there, toward the future they would continue to build together, day by day, choice by choice, one step at a time. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.